Former Massachusetts Senator Republican Scott Brown sends a clear example that he may be considering a 2026 campaign run in the state of New Hampshire for the U.S. Senate as he took a trip down to Washington, D.C. and met with some top GOP leaders. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm taking a look at this article by the Concord Monitor that shows the former senator who has been living in New Hampshire for about 10 years now, certainly showing signs he's intending on making a political comeback and running against Democratic incumbent Senator Jeanne Shaheen in 2026. In an article in the Concord Monitor by Paul Steinhauser, he writes, some high-profile meetings in the nation's capital this week by former U.S. Senator Scott Brown are fueling more speculation that the Republican from Rye will launch a 2026 run in New Hampshire for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by former governor and longtime Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Brown has been saying that he's seriously mulling a Senate bid, so his trip to Washington, D.C. on Tuesday didn't come as a complete surprise. Yet his travels were the latest sign that he appears to be putting his political house in order before likely announcing his candidacy in the months ahead. While in Washington, the former senator met with Senate Majority Leader Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the top Republican in the chamber, as well as Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, who is the chair of the Senate GOP's campaign committee. If you are unfamiliar with them, that means basically he's in charge of the committee that's tasked with trying to get Republicans elected in the upcoming election. In a separate social media post, Brown called Thune, quote, my dear friend, as he pointed to the 2 years that overlapped in the Senate, and he said Scott was, quote, a good man and the right person to chair the National Republican Senatorial Committee and expand our majority in 2026. So obviously, Scott Brown is making the rounds here and clearly showing his interest in running for the Senate race in New Hampshire, which, spoiler alert, Scott Brown does give, in my opinion, the Republicans the best chance, if not one of the best chances, to win that Senate seat in 2026. Only outgoing Governor Chris Sununu and current Governor Kelly Ayotte do I think maybe give a slightly better chance than Scott Brown, though neither of those individuals have pointed to any interest in this seat whatsoever, so I essentially don't even consider them in the conversation. Arguably, one of the most important meetings for Brown while in D.C. was his get-together with Turning Point USA founder and CEO Charlie Kirk, who is a politically powerful and influential ally of President Donald Trump. Kirk's group, along with its political wing, have become major players in conservative politics. In the 2024 election cycle, Kirk took a lead in helping Trump and Republicans get out the vote in key swing states. Brown praised Kirk in a social media post, saying the Turning Point organizations have, quote, delivered huge wins for President Trump and the MAGA movement everywhere. And I think if you're starting to read in between the lines here, I think Brown met with Kirk in hopes of potentially recruiting Turning Point USA volunteers throughout the state of New Hampshire and across the country in his bid for the Senate in 2026, as likely in a very close Senate race, whichever party turns out more of their voters is going to ultimately decide which candidate wins. The 65-year-old Brown has been meeting in recent months with various Republican and conservative groups in New Hampshire. Brown said last month that he's doing his, quote, due diligence, meeting with anybody and everybody. So you'll be seeing me a lot around, whether it's parades, triathlons, my rock band, meeting, and getting out and really learning. If Brown moves ahead and launches a 2026 Senate run, having strong support from a major national player on the right of the party, such as Charlie Kirk, will be important, as for some of the reasons I echoed already. The New Hampshire Democratic Party took no time in taking aim at Brown, claiming in an email that the former senator traveled to Washington, D.C. to establish himself as the yes-man candidate of the far right. Obviously, the Democrats are not stupid. They know Scott Brown is the best candidate the Republicans have in 2026 and are trying to attack him early and try and discredit him in what is going to be, as they expect, a close Senate race in 2026 if he does run. Brown made headlines in 2010 as the then state senator in the blue state of Massachusetts, where he won a special U.S. Senate election to serve the remainder of the term of the late longtime Democratic Senator Ted Kennedy. After losing an election in 2012 to Senator Elizabeth Warren, Brown moved to New Hampshire, where he had spent the first 5 years of his childhood and where his family had roots dating back to the colonial era. He launched a Senate campaign months later and narrowly lost to Shaheen in the 2014 election. Don't worry, I'll be showing those election results shortly as well. After hosting nearly all the Republican presidential candidates in the 2016 cycle at the speaking events he termed the No BS Backyard Barbecues, Brown eventually endorsed Donald Trump in the weeks ahead of New Hampshire's First in the Nation primary. After Trump was elected president, he nominated Brown as U.S. ambassador to New Zealand, where the former senator served for 4 years. Also, just an interesting fun fact, Brown did host his No BS Backyard Barbecues again for 2024, having most of the major candidates going to those. Donald Trump, I do not believe, went to one of the barbecues, but he did have Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, R.F. Kennedy Jr., and many more. And so, returning to New Hampshire at the end of the first Trump administration, Brown supported his wife Gail, a former television news reporter and anchor, as she ran for Congress in 2022. Another fun fact, Gail actually lost that primary to Trump's current press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. So that's a little interesting kind of Trump connection there. The Browns stayed politically active and once again hosted many of the Republican presidential candidates as well as RFK Jr. at the events in the 2024 presidential cycle, as I mentioned. Shaheen, who turns 78 next week, has yet to say if she intends to run for a fourth 6-year term representing New Hampshire in the Senate, but Democratic sources in the senator's political orbit say they assume that she'll run again. Shaheen, the Democrat from Madbury, who is now the top Democrat on the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the first female ever to serve in one of the 2 leadership positions on the committee, doesn't sound like she's getting ready to retire. This week, she highlighted in an email to supporters that, quote, I will fiercely take on these fights head on, as she described the upcoming clashes with the new Trump administration. Shaheen vowed to never stop working as hard as I possibly can to create a better future for you and your family. And that's it for the article. So this is very, very fascinating. And I think a lot of, I would say, outsiders will be quick to scoff at this and say, well, is this real? Like, is New Hampshire actually going to be competitive for 2026? And I cannot stress this enough, as I try my best to play it down the middle, especially on videos like these, but I do want to give a little bit of a warning to the Democrats on this one. Democrats brushing Scott Brown aside and saying he's not a real threat to Jeanne Shaheen is ultimately what, in my view, cost Bob Casey his Senate seat in Pennsylvania, and something I think could realistically happen to Jeanne Shaheen against Scott Brown. This is a former senator who, in every race he's run for Senate, has been considered the underdog candidate, and he won in a very, very blue state. And when he ran in 2014, he narrowly lost to Jeanne Shaheen after only moving back to New Hampshire for a few months, 51.46% to Scott Brown's 48.21%. A margin, if you want to do the math here, of just about 15 to 16,000 votes. So now it gets into more the election side of things. We did just see the 2024 presidential election, and the good news for the Democrats is Kamala Harris did win the state of New Hampshire over Donald Trump 51% to 48%. The bad news is it was only a 3-point race, when if you look back at 2020, you may recall Joe Biden won it in 2020 52.7% to 45.4%. So Trump narrowed the margins from 2020 going to 2024. So New Hampshire, at very least, in the ratings, is going to be a lean Democratic state at best to begin with, at the 3% for Donald Trump. The good news is that the last time Shaheen was she was on the ballot in 2014, she won by about 3.2%. The last time before that she was on the ballot, she won by over 15%. The difference is the Republicans did not have a top-tier candidate to run in 2020. Scott Brown is certainly one of the best candidates Republicans could run in New Hampshire in 2026. Looking at the Senate map right now, I have 5 Senate seats that I currently see as a toss-up, or at least going to be very competitive. They are Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan. Those 3 are pretty much without question going to be very competitive. Maine with Susan Collins, I think, gives the potential for it to be very competitive depending on who the Democrats run. I know Collins is a long-time incumbent, but I still think it's Maine as a Democratic state, or at least likely Democratic state, where it could be competitive. New Hampshire is going to be one of the top 5 most competitive Senate races across the United States. As for things start out right now, I think giving Shaheen's incumbency advantage, I would still narrowly start this out as a lean Democrat. And that may be bold, because I would expect a lot of predictions to start this race out early on as likely Democrat. But again, I really cannot overstate this enough. Scott Brown is one of the strongest Republican challengers in the state of New Hampshire, and Democrats, if they are not careful, they could potentially lose a very close Senate race in a state they may think they have locked up, kind of like what happened in Pennsylvania and what almost happened in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Nevada, and in Arizona. So it's going to be very fascinating to watch this Senate race in the state of New Hampshire. for 2026. Again, I do have it starting out as a lean Democrat when it comes down to making a call for every race. I do still think it narrowly stays Democrat, but this is very interesting news where Scott Brown is certainly nothing to scoff at. And I really think he's the strongest recruit Republicans have put up in New Hampshire for the Senate level, honestly, since him in 2014. So this is a very fascinating situation and one I'm monitoring closely, as I really strongly believe that this is going to be one of the closest, top 5 closest Senate races in the 2026 Senate elections. And Brown meeting with Republican leaders this past week only shows that the chances of him running for the seat are getting greater and greater as time goes on. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Actually, before I go, I did want to show you a little bit more on the state of New Hampshire itself. The big counties in New Hampshire to watch for are right here. We have Rockingham County, Hillsborough County, Merrimack County. These 3 counties are very important to watch for in terms of this is where most of the population in New Hampshire lives in these 3 counties. Scott Brown won 2 out of the 3 last time, and that is a very, very significant number. If we look at the 2024 presidential election in New Hampshire, Donald Trump did not win Hillsborough County, but Donald Trump did win Rockingham County. So for Scott Brown to win the Senate race, as I say, as goes Hillsborough, seems to be as goes New Hampshire. It gets the percentage almost spot on for the state every single time. This is going to be the county to watch for 2026 for Shaheen versus Brown. If Brown is winning this county like he did back in 2014, there's a very good chance he may be winning the state of New Hampshire overall, as the percentages always seem to line up for Hillsborough. But just winning Hillsborough alone won't be enough for Brown. Brown needs to win Rockingham and Hillsborough, and maybe even win Merrimack County, where the capital city of Concord is. That's all for a future date and future discussion, but this is certainly going to be a very fascinating Senate race in a election year where it's like, how many competitive Senate races are there really going to be? The closer we're getting, it seems a lot more Senate races are getting more and more competitive as things move on. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to like and subscribe, and hope to see you in a future video. That will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like. And if you really liked it, please remember to click the subscribe button. And make sure you turn post notifications on so you always get notified when I post a new video. That way you never miss one. Also, please remember to share this video with your friends and family if you really, really, really like the video. And remember to stay tuned, because I'll be posting at least one video every single day leading up until Election Day. So I'd really appreciate it if you keep coming back and watching those videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.